Okay, thanks everyone for taking time out of your busy week to join us this evening for this candid conversation for the federal election with Aboriginal women candidates. We know everyone is very busy, particularly the candidates out there, so we really appreciate them taking time out for this webinar. My name is Kat Henaway. I am a descendant of the Mariam and Merle peoples of the Torres Strait Islands. I'm also founder of Politics in Colour, and this is a business that amplifies politicians and candidates of colour, and we are all about increasing cultural diversity in politics. I'll start by acknowledging that we are all gathering on Aboriginal land today and pay respects to the elders past, present and emerging, acknowledging them as the traditional custodians of knowledge for this land. I further acknowledge the traditional owners of the country where you are all joining us from, and pay respects to your elders, past, present and future. I'm coming to you from Bidjigal country here in Eora Nation, Kensington in Sydney. If you'd like to pop in the chat which country you're all dialing in from, that would be great. Sponsoring us tonight is Deadly Politics, which is an online platform which is run by Aboriginal man Warren Roberts, who is with us here this evening. He's co-facilitating this event with me. Warren is a proud Thangari and Bundjalung man who has extensive experience working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities for NGOs, universities, as well as local, state and federal government. In his early career, Warren was a research officer for the New South Wales Upper House President in the Parliament of New South Wales. In 2010, he was the National Union of Students National Indigenous Officer and was campaign coordinator of the National Indigenous Students Equal Education, Equal Representation campaign. He is also founder of a company called Yarn Australia, which started in Sydney in 2017. In 2012, Warren launched Deadly Politics, which is an online political advocacy platform for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Currently, Warren is coordinator for the Redfern Waterloo Aboriginal Affordable Housing Campaign Alliance of Aboriginal community-controlled organisations and allies. Politics actually runs in Warren's family because his auntie, an Aboriginal councillor called Patricia Dixon, was the first Aboriginal woman to get elected to local government in New South Wales, and that was in 1983. And she was also the first Aboriginal woman federal candidate for the Australian Labor Party here in New South Wales. So Warren has had a lot of experience campaigning for his auntie. Okay, over to you, Warren.
Thanks, Kat. Dorinda Cox is a Yamaji Noongar woman with a strong record of working for social justice in her community, locally, globally and nationally. She is the mother of 2 daughters and a small business owner. Dorinda has over 20 years experience working in government and non-government sectors and has made significant contributions in policy and advocacy in areas of domestic violence, child protection and Aboriginal justice. Dorinda worked in the non-government and government sectors and was an Australian government representative on several delegations on gender equality at the United Nations Commission for the Status of Women in New York, at the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation in Peru, and also UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific in Thailand. In 2013, Dorinda started her own business, Inspired Change Consulting Group, to advise government bodies and departments on social issues, policy and advocacy work. Thanks, Dorinda, for joining us tonight. We'll pass it over to you if you can share us a little bit about your story.
Thanks, Warren, and thanks everyone for joining us. Can I add my acknowledgement of country as well? I'm joining you from Boorloo in Perth on the West Coast, and I want to acknowledge that this is the land of the Whadjuk Noongar people. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and their emerging leaders. and that this land was never ceded. We still have no treaties in this country with the First Peoples, and we continue to fight for First Nations justice in this country. And it's something that I'm really proud of our party taking to the federal election in order to enshrine truth, treaty and voice into the next parliament, and making sure that we create that pathway for our future generations. So thank you so much. I suppose my career to politics, and Warren did outline some of that in my bio, started very much so when I joined WA Police as a young 17-year-old cadet. And I thought that this would be a great game changer for me. But unfortunately it wasn't. And I went into an institution where I didn't, or had very little power to make any change. And so I was quite naive as a young person and thought that I could change the world. Unfortunately, I came out the other end a good 8.5 years later with a lot more knowledge, but a lot more passion for my people to make change. And what I saw in the justice system, I think really changed my life and changed my perspective of the world. I grew up in social housing and in the poverty line. And so I understand the struggles of our mob and our families in particular, who come from stolen generations. My family, my mother's family, are from 5 generations of the stolen generation. We can still continue to battle intergenerational trauma in our communities. I went on to work in many government departments at many levels, from senior leadership right through to administrative frontline services. As Warren said, I was a UN rep, and that was in 2013, and I took my 4-month-old baby across to the US and with my partner, and had my first glimpse into a political arena. And I learned a lot being part of an NGO, a delegation to the US. I learnt about diplomacy. I learnt about engagement with high-level politicians and ministers, and it was my first taste of that. But I really wanted to learn from that experience and bring home to my people what I learnt from that and how I could use that as a platform. I went on to be only one of 2 Indigenous women that have ever represented at the APEC Forum on Women in the Economy in Peru a few years later, and then into UN ESCAP in the Asia Pacific region in Thailand only a few years ago, just before COVID hit. Being a single mum now and trying to juggle politics as a federal senator, it's always going to have its challenges. But I started my own consultancy business not long after my first daughter was born, because I sort of got very strong-headed and didn't want to work for anybody else. So that was the short of that one. And I think you just grow older and wiser that you can make so much change being outside the system. I knew that the hustle was going to be real and that I had to do a lot of travel. I had to make lots of sacrifices during that time. But I'm pretty much a professional networker, and so the advocacy and the networks that I've had both internationally, nationally, and also at a state level have helped me really foster, grow and nurture all of my political contexts of the things that I want to do in the future. So they've helped me grow as a First Nations woman, but also as a very strong grassroots advocate for my people. So that's my story. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, that's wonderful.
I'm going to head over to now our second guest speaker. Jackie is a Kamilaroi and Bigamable woman from St. George in southwest Queensland, and a director of her consultancy business, Connecting to Culture, which provides cultural consultancy services to early childhood institutions, schools and government and NGOs that seeks to improve and build on services provided to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families. Prior to this, Jackie worked at Melbourne University, where she implemented the first 1,000 Days Australia program in 2018 to 2019. Jackie is a World Forum Foundation global leader from young children and also a director of the Kubara Kindergarten and Pre-Prep Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Cooperation Board. She is dedicated to educating and uplifting awareness of early childhood educators, family support agencies and government departments about the importance of embedding her heritage and Torres Strait Islander perspectives in classrooms and organisations so that families and community members feel comfortable to access appropriate service. Thanks, Jackie, for joining us. Please share us a little about your story.
So I suppose I do come from St George in southwest Queensland, and I'll always call that home. Although I have travelled a lot over my time, and I've lived in a lot of communities throughout Australia. So with my husband and my 4 children, we've lived in places like Jabiru in the Northern Territory. We've lived on Groote Eylandt. We lived in Tabatha over in WA for a little while, and we lived in Perth up at Kalamunda as well for a while. So that sort of then took us to Townsville, where my 4 children got to go to school in Townsville, and I suppose it opened my eyes to Torres Strait Islander people because, you know, coming from a small town, being very light-skinned, being known as being an Aboriginal person in my hometown because everybody knows this. But, you know, when you get out of your hometowns, it's always a challenge to have these conversations with people around the colour of my skin and my fairness and you know, just having the heart that I do for my culture and for my people. It's become easier to have those conversations and to be that voice and that advocate for our people. But when I got to Townsville and knowing for the first time really deeply about the difference between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures, that's probably what has driven me to make sure that educators understand the difference, because often they put us in the bucket of being Indigenous, and, you know, we'll go into those services and they'll have Aboriginal culture displayed in some sort of manner, in some cases not at all, but then the Torres Strait Islander culture isn't there at all. So that's been one of my real passions, is for educators to understand the difference between the two. My career has taken me to education. So I worked with Education Queensland. I've worked in community with not-for-profit organisations and NGOs. I've also worked with the University of Melbourne. And like Dorinda, I was pleased when I was able to be my own boss, because I felt that I was doing all of this work and creating all of these programs for all of these government organisations and institutions, and they would take the credit for all the work that, you know, we would do, and often they wouldn't follow it through as we really, you know, designed it to be. So our voices would get lost, and so, you know, the programs wouldn't be delivered the way that I'd want. And, you know, then because we've got to stay in community and be with community and still, you know, work in community, I never felt comfortable when those programs never finished properly or they didn't deliver what they said they were going to deliver. So that was one of the things. Like, now I can be the voice. I'm my own boss, and if I see it, I'll call it. If, you know, educators, if they say that, oh, we're a little bit worried about doing or embedding Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives because I'm worried I'll get it wrong, I can actually say to them now, it's okay to get it wrong, but it's not okay to do nothing. So, you know, I'm one of those people that will just call it as it is. And I suppose my life experience has really helped me to have that voice and to speak it as it is. I've been a part of the Global Leaders, which is a part of the World Forum Foundation. So I became a global leader, but then I was a coordinator as well for the Indigenous Global Leaders for 2 years. So I was lucky enough to be the coordinator for global leaders from different parts of the world. So I had people from Canada, American Indian global leaders, and other leaders from around the world. So I just feel really blessed that I've been able to do that, because it actually opened my eyes to the fact that Indigenous people from around the world have actually experienced colonisation like we have in Australia, and you know, they don't have their voices, and they don't have the confidence to speak up and stand up either. So it was really good to be able to be a part of that. And I suppose the reason that I've come into politics is being a part of the Australian Rural Leadership Program for the last 2 years, so with the Australian Rural Leadership Foundation. So again, that tested me, and it was something that I learned a lot. It gave me the opportunity to learn a lot about myself, and it gave me the opportunity to actually, I suppose, promote and advocate for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with farmers and agriculturalists and people from government and people that lived on the land. So because I'm so passionate about my connection to country, my connection to my family and my people, I just needed to get an understanding of why farmers and agriculturalists don't always have respect for our country and are quite comfortable in getting rid of or destroying our significant areas and, you know, our culture in a lot of cases. So being with 26 non-Indigenous people and being one of two, I was an Aboriginal woman and there was a Torres Strait Islander man. So it was really difficult to be in that space sometimes, just to hear them speak about and not have respect or even know. I think it was that thing around the not knowing. So it gave me a couple of years to sort of break down some of those barriers. So I have to say the experience of being an Australian rural leadership leader has brought me to this place, because 12 months ago I sat in the agriculture, mines and energy space where David Littleproud and Barnaby Joyce sit, and they're two of the politicians that actually, I'm going to say, they've stuffed our river system, and they've allowed people to take water without paying for it and just to take it just because. And I suppose one of the things that I want to say as a senator or a candidate is that that's not okay. And we need cultural rights to our waters, and we need to have voices or consultation with Aboriginal people when it comes to our country and our significant areas. My dad has been an advocate for the river and our culture, and he's been a custodian of our place for all of his life. And so I suppose now it's my time to step up and support him. So that's why I didn't like sitting in that space listening to a non-Indigenous man talk about his leadership journey and being an advisor to the government about the cashless card being introduced into the communities. And I just thought, that's not okay. I need to be a voice in this space. So here I am. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie, for coming along and sharing your story. We'll now head over to our third guest speaker, Trish Frail. Trish is an Aboriginal businesswoman, and Trish Frail has a long history of working locally, statewide, nationally and globally in social justice areas and community services. She specialises in domestic violence, homelessness, community development, as well as small business. When her local council decided to build a nuclear waste dump in Brewarrina, she started a campaign called No Bunda Bunda on Namberland to prevent the transportation and dumping of nuclear waste in her community. As a result of the success of that campaign and her widespread support in the community, Trish was recently elected as a councillor to the Brewarrina Shire Council. Trish says, I love my hometown of Brewarrina. And when I was asked to nominate for the Parks region, I thought about it and realised that I'm passionate about issues that affect the people in Parks region. And I can take my passion to the people and get as many votes as possible, aiming to be elected in with a lot of campaigning, with getting a positive name for the Greens. And I welcome Trish to come along and share your story.
Thanks a lot, everyone. I apologise because I'm actually on my phone. I'm in a motel and I had the internet and then it's just dropped off, so I had to jump on the phone. So, as I said, yeah, I'm a Nambar woman. I'm from Brewarrina, and I'm currently at Narrabri on Kamilaroi country. So, and I also would like to acknowledge the fact that everybody else is on, you know, on the countries of where they're from. So, I'm a mother of 5. I had my first child when I was 16, and I just went through crap. You know, like you go through domestic violence, you go through the homelessness, you know, you go through everything. And, but you survive. And that's exactly what I done. I survived, and it made me a lot stronger person to the person that I am today. As I said, yeah, I moved back to Bree 15 years ago. Then not long ago, the council wanted to build the nuclear waste dump, and we had a council meeting, a community meeting, and the council was standing there and they were telling us all these wonderful things that they were doing, and then right at the end of the meeting they said, you know, they were going to be building the nuclear waste dump, and it was like, oh, we didn't know what to think. Or so then somebody said to me, Trish, do you realise that at the moment Brewarrina is known worldwide for the fish traps, and if they ever build a nuclear waste dump, that's all it'll ever be known as. And I thought, no, not having that. I love my fish traps. I love my culture. So I started my campaign, and I didn't have a lot of experience in campaigning, and but I done it. And I got a lot of respect out of it, and but more importantly, I educated people about what nuclear was, including educating myself. I then I wasn't too happy with what was happening at council, and you know, trying to sneak in the bloody nuclear waste was one thing. And so I thought, right, I'm going to run for council, and I got in, and there's been a few things happening which I am really, really glad of. Then I was asked to do the be the Greens member for the Parks region, and I thought, yeah, all right, I can do that. And so I've just been going around campaigning like everybody else, and you know, I just didn't realise how much I didn't know, and which was true. Like I really didn't know anything at all about politics, because if you would have said to me, you know, 5 years ago, Trish, you're going to start getting involved in politics, I would have laughed at you, because there's no way in the world would I have thought of that. But gee, I'm enjoying it. I really am. And as I said, I'm learning a lot. And I'm also teaching a lot of other people more about politics, and the fact that I'm also the first female to put my hand up out here at the Parks region. And it's like, that's a shock, you know, like 2022, and you know, women are still not being recognised, and so it's it's with a great honour that I'm actually representing women. Now, after, a couple of hours before our names were, very tired. We've got another female ghost for the Parks region, and that's from Pauline Hanson's party, and this lady actually lives in Sydney. She doesn't have anything at all to do with parks, and so as far as I'm concerned, I'm still the only female out here standing up representing women. And it's been really, really good, because I've actually been trying to push women's issues through, and especially about our wages, because of the fact that we as women are earning less than males, and especially we're working in the social welfare sector, we earn 10% less, and so that really needs to be addressed. You know, all the domestic violence that women go through, the homelessness, all our educational issues. So I'm just really enjoying who I am and what I'm doing, and the fact that I'm doing something for our community. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Trish. Very inspiring story, and congratulations on your efforts so far.
Thanks.
Our fourth guest speaker is Tabatha Young from the Labor Party in Queensland. She's running for the seat of Bonnor, I believe. Tabatha Young is a fierce advocate for equality, for equal opportunity and equal access to essential services in the Bonnor community. As an Aboriginal woman, Tabatha has spent her entire career ensuring a level playing field for all in the justice system, and that community understands their rights, particularly for community women and families who are facing domestic violence and child protection system. As a local mum, in Bonnor, Tabatha made the decision to run as she feels it is time for change in her community. Tabatha sees families are being left behind by Scott Morrison and his government, with growing gap payments and waiting lists for health services, not to mention inaction around critical sectors such as aged care that are crying out for reform after the Royal Commission into Ageing. Tabatha is a strong advocate for community of Bonnor and says it's time for a new face for Bonnor. I invite now Tabatha to share your story.
Hi everyone. I'll just acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm sitting on, and that's the Quandamooka people here on the bay side of Brisbane. And I'll acknowledge our elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge Senator Cox, who's online tonight, and what an honour it is to be sitting as being a part of this panel with Senator Cox, who's paving the way for women going into politics. I sit in awe when I come into these panels or sit in meetings with senators, and what an honour it is. First, I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm the first Aboriginal woman to be sitting for standing as a candidate in the seat of Bonnor after Uncle Neville Bonnor, and that's just a huge honour as well. So thank you. And thank you, Kat, for inviting me to be a part of this panel. My connections are to Chillagoe and Innisfail in North Queensland, and my family is also affected by the government policies of the stolen generation. It's impacted on my family quite a bit. We don't know our direct connections, and I've only been able to trace it back 3 generations, and still not able to get those real links. But Pop was born in Chillagoe. I started my career at a university with the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander Legal Service here in Queensland. what a pleasure it was to be working for such a service on the front line. And that's my passion, the justice system, and how decisions have impacted on our people. I started working with the lawyers in the crime, and then I went over and did social work stuff in the prisons doing the parole applications. And boy, wasn't that interesting seeing how decisions are made and impact on mob when they want to get parole. It was absolutely disgusting. And you can see why our brothers and sisters have had enough when they're incarcerated. The system just needs a total overhaul. In that time, I touched on child protection and DV, but it wasn't until I left the legal service and started going into our ACCOs, working on the front line of the child protection system, that you really get a true insight to how legislation impacts on our mob. And I grew really upset with those decisions in the child protection system. They were just wrong. Then I became a CEO of an Aboriginal family violence service in regional Queensland. And when you see mums and 5 kids being sent from North Queensland to regional Queensland to go to shelter, you really start to see that there's something wrong in the system and the decisions that are being made. They're sent away from country and put in refuge, and then they're reintegrated into another community away from their community. So wrong. I then started seeing the true impact of the housing crisis, and as some of my campaign team are online tonight, I've campaigned on the fact that it's more than just a housing crisis, and the impact on our families are not where they're being prevented from being reunified because there's no housing for them to tick that box. They've addressed that child protection concern. It is absolutely appalling in current 2022 that we don't have enough housing and we can't reunify family because mum hasn't got a house. So there we go. In Queensland, we have a 2-year. You get your kids removed. If you haven't addressed those child protection concerns in 2 years, then they go long term. Well, what happens if you haven't got a house? Does that mean that you lose your kids for life? No one can answer those questions, but that's what's impacting on our community, our Aboriginal community, and it is disgusting to think that that's what's happening. When I started seeing families living in tents and based on racism also, they can't get accommodation or housing in regional Queensland, I made a decision to join the Australian Labor Party. And I want change. I want housing. And we want more than just housing in cities. We need housing in rural Australia because that's where we've got problems. We don't have services either to address child protection concerns in rural Australia. And we need a housing and we want our families reunified. So I joined the Australian Labor Party and I got my first newsletter, and I then applied through the expression of interest for the seat of Bonnor. I never expected to be endorsed as their candidate because I was new to the party. But I went through the process and I kept saying to my parents, we'll just see what happens. And each step of the way I was getting. And then finally in November, I was endorsed as the Labor candidate for Bonnor. And it's a learning curve. You might as well say I'm a virgin to politics. But what I have going for me and known in the community is I'm a strong advocator. And I will always advocate to my hardest to ensure that the community get what they need, that a client is getting what they need as well. And that's what I plan to do if I win on the 21st, is to advocate for Bonnor, advocate for our community, but also make sure that the voices of my Aboriginal community and Torres Strait Islander community are being heard, and we're addressing the housing crisis. We're addressing the closing the gap targets. We're making sure that government take ownership of their part on closing the gap as well, because we know for a fact that it's hard to get the government to sit at the table and say, yes, we're going to do this. So I want to win on May 21, get down there, and then I can start planning the way for our families and get those, make sure there's a level playing field for them. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for coming along and sharing your story. I now pass it over to Kat, who's going to open up a broader Q&A and continue the conversation.
Thank you very much, Warren, and thank you to the panelists. Some very, very passionate and incredible women on this panel. I just would like to circle back to Senator Cox. Can you just let us know a little bit more about the story of how you connected with the Greens Party? I mean, were you interested in politics for a long time? Were you a member of the Greens Party? How did that happen? How did you all of a sudden become a senator of WA?
Okay, it's a very, very, very long-winded story. I don't know how long people got for that yarn, but let's give it a go, hey? I told this story in my first speech that I visited the Parliament. My mum was working for a government department at the time. I was 17 years old. It was school holidays. And I went into the Parliament on the public tour, and I went through the public gallery, and I, walked the halls and had a look at, Neville Bonner's story. So thank you, Tabatha, for, for talking about Uncle Neville and reminding me of that day. But I also read the Redfern speech by Paul Keating on this day, and remember reading the first couple of paragraphs and thinking, oh my God, this is the Prime Minister who knows my story, and just having this aha moment of, wow, do all Prime Ministers think like this? And is this really how they think, but they actually do nothing? And having that moment as a 17-year-old, and then forgetting about it and going on with my life, and that being a really pivotal point in my career of wanting to have that fire in my belly reignited to make change. And I think when you are born into political circumstances, which all of us are as blackfellas, let's be honest, right? That's who we are. It's by blood that we have that passion for change and the real raw deal that we've had. We want to decolonise and get back to the way we were before. We might not have that, have it all, but we're going to give it a red hot go, right? And that the only way we're going to do that if there's more of us sitting up in the Parliament, because it's a lonely place of the back row in the Senate with me and the other naughty girl from Victoria, Lydia Thorpe. And, we get up to some mischief in the back row, us two. And like Tabatha, I was a member of the Labor Party, and I went to a local meeting here in Cannington, which is the local branch for me. And I remember the Labor member who is now a minister here in Western Australia, who didn't even acknowledge me the whole time I was in the meeting. And I said to him later on, actually, it was funny, after I became a senator, he came up and shook my hand, and he said to me, I think you're closer to Labor than what you are to the Greens. And I said, well, it's funny because your branch was the first one I attended. And he looked really shocked. And I said, if you would have recognised me on that day and saw my political passion and my ability, I probably would have stayed with Labor. But I went and found my political home, which was the Greens. And the reason I did that is because I did a lot of soul searching, and there needed to be a lot of healing in my family through the intergenerational trauma that we had from the stolen generation. But like many of the beautiful, strong women on here, also a history of domestic violence. So being on country, being immersed in culture is what helped with that healing and caring for country and reconnecting to it. So my values very much align with the Greens and the values and the pillars of the Greens, being non-violent and a peace party, making sure that we're fighting for First Nations justice, making sure that we have consensus-making democracy, is all of the things that are part of culture for me. And so coming from a matriarchal position, I really align all of my values with the party. Now, I'm not saying my party's perfect. That's definitely far from it. There are still a few stoushes that we have even in the party room around, you know, like how we present ourselves and the things that we have about understanding that we are the original environmentalists in this country. And so we have to tell our story and own our truth. And so it's a really important conversation. I've run as a candidate 3 times now. So back as far as 2016, I ran in the seat of Jandakot. Very, very outside chance. I was put in a very unwinnable seat. And to be honest, I think that happens to a lot of our mob. We're put in unwinnable seats. We lose a lot of confidence in, you know, getting out there and running campaigns. And like Trish, I think you and I share a lot. We knew nothing about campaigning when we first started and about politics. And you have to learn, right, on your feet and prove yourself in the party that you can do this. And that you have to have every confidence in yourself to be able to do that and to stand in your own skin and say, I know what it likes to fight for my community. I know what it's like to get out there and raise up grassroots voices in the issues that matter to people and the way that we live. And so in 2018, I ran in the seat of Fremantle in the by-election, and again, very outside chance because the MP, Josh Wilson, was caught up in the Section 44 constitutional stuff. And then I got a phone call about, it's nearly 12 months ago, over 12 months ago, nearly 18 months actually, from someone in the party saying, you could be our next senator. And I said, no way, I'm not ready for that. And they said, yeah, be ready because Rachel Seawitt's about to step down. She's going to resign. And I waited for 11 months. And so in my consulting business, I lost about 100 grand. I was living on the bones of my butt, and I'm living at home with my mum and my kids and my partner at the time, just doing it hard, you know, and people don't realise that we don't come from privilege, we don't come from money, where you can just step into those sorts of things, and that you have to do it hard to make some sacrifices to be where you are today, but also not forget where you come from. And I think that's been a really important part of the journey, is that I still go back into community, I still go and help cook dinners and hand out stuff, and still go into Noongar radio and have a yarn with their mob. You know, you might be a federal senator, but it's still who you are, and you can't get away from who you are. It doesn't matter what you do and what title you have at the front of your name.
And it's very grounding, isn't it, as well, to go back to family, back on country, and just remind yourself of where you came from.
Absolutely.
Thank you for sharing that. It's really interesting because I interviewed Lydia Thorpe a couple of years ago, and she said something similar. She started with Labor, or she was a member of Labor, and she was talking to them, and then she happened to be invited to a Greens conference, didn't know anything about it, and she was absolutely captivated by that. And so she switched from Labor to Greens. But yes, really, really interesting. Thank you. Trish, I just wanted to ask you, what on earth is it like running against a ghost? That is the weirdest concept, isn't it? I mean,
it really is. And every time we go to a meeting and I meet the other candidates or anything, and we always ask each other, do you know who this person is? You know, like we haven't even really seen a bloody photo of her. So none of us have got any idea of who she is, or other than that she's from Sydney.
right.
So, but I've since found out that she's actually not very happy with the Pauline Hanson party too. I found that out tonight because they are not supporting her.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So
maybe the ghost will never appear, huh?
Yeah. So yeah, it's I'll actually have to sit down and really think about it, and because to me, I just don't even acknowledge it. You know, like as far as I'm concerned, I'm the only female running. So, and I know that's how everybody in the Parks electorate also sees me. You know, they only acknowledge that I am the one.
The living, breathing, actual candidate.
That's it. That's it.
Tabatha, I just wanted to come back to you. Thank you for sharing that incredible story. I'd like to know how you got involved with Labor, because I think you would be very difficult to overlook. I mean, you've got a big, strong, powerful energy and passion. So how did Labor find you, or how did you find Labor?
It comes from my dad. And my family have always been Labor supporters. I've always sat in awe of Queensland Labor as a child growing up. I used to love catching up with my local MP, Pat Purcell, back in the days in Bulimba. And I should have joined the Labor Party when I left high school, but I didn't. I've left it until later in life. And I think that was the best decision. I've got a bit of a life experience and learnt the skills of, you know, being an advocator, wanting change. So I decided to join the Labor Party last year. And I think it was the best decision I've made. I don't know, I only know little bits about politics, having to work on the outside and negotiate funding agreements and such, but I think that experience now is going to work in my favour if elected on the 21st. I can go down and do what I've got to do, but the Labor Party was just what I was raised with.
Do you have a plan B if God forbid you're not elected in this particular round? What is your next step? Will you continue? Because it would be an absolute shame if you didn't.
I will. I've actually signed up, and I'm just waiting on the outcome of the registration to the Pathway to Politics with QUT. I can't wait to if I don't get up, then I'm going to spend the time next 3 years building up my skills and working within the party to go for round 2, hopefully. If the Queensland Labor let me, I'll go for round 2 in 4 years' time.
Good on you. I'm really happy to hear that, because we need more staunch Indigenous women, more women of colour in politics. And I can already sense that you're going to have a huge impact. You all will. God willing, you all get voted in. Jackie, I just wanted to circle back to you quickly before we open up to the audience. You mentioned that you were locked down at the moment with COVID, or a son with COVID. Have you actually been out there in the community? And if so, what has that been like for you?
Yeah, so I'm
Weeper, aren't you?
a bit nervous. So I'm in Weeper. I didn't mention that I'm in Weeper, and I'm actually on the country of the Almith people up here. I've been here for 12 months, and yes, my son has had COVID, and so that sort of has stopped me from doing too much campaigning, because I didn't want to go out into community and be, infecting people. But a lot of my campaign has actually been on social media, and I have started. I'm going to go to the polling booth. The pre-polling opens on Monday, so I'll just make sure that I'm there every day next week, and I'll be there all day on Saturday. So it has been a bit of a challenge, Kat, because the party that I'm standing with is also a really new party, so the Australian Federation Party. The reason that I aligned myself with them was because I really, their policies and their values just spoke to me, because like Tabatha, my dad was a shearer, and I grew up in a household where Labor was the party that, he voted for. He was one of those ones that he was on strike and he fought, he was in the union all of his life. And when I decided I was going to stand, I had to actually go and let him know that I wasn't going to be standing with Labor, that I was going with this new party. And I actually was a little bit nervous because I didn't know how he would feel about that. And he just said to me, "Bub, you've got to do what you need to do." He said, these people here just don't really know what they're doing. He said, "You just do what you have to do." And I just feel really proud that he's going to be at the polling booth for me on the day of the elections at St. George. So I feel really privileged and proud that I've got family that are behind me. And I've got my brother in Townsville, and because I lived there for 15 years, hopefully people will see my call flukes around and they'll think, "Oh, I better vote for Jackie." So, yeah.
Vote one for Jackie. Thank you, Jackie. That's wonderful. I've just put in the chat a link to Pathways to Politics program. Tabatha mentioned that. It's an incredible program that runs through UNSW, Melbourne University and Queensland University of Technology. They have a couple of intakes per year, and it's a program for women, sometimes 10 weeks, sometimes 3 or 4 modules. But quite a few women I know have gone through the program and they have come out completely different. Like they've come out with rocket fuel in their engines.
Hey, Kat,
program, yeah.
Can I just add that for anyone who aspires to go into politics and you join the Labor Party, we've also got the Emily's List. So I'm an Emily's List candidate, so I'm being mentored by a current sitting politician, Sheena Watt from Victoria.
Oh, love Sheena.
Yeah, so it's been great experience. So if you aspire to go into politics, there's support out there for you.
Yep, that's a great point. Emily's List is another great one as well to tap. Okay, we're going to open up the microphones, and if anyone has any questions, you can raise your hand or just clear your throat and we'll come to you.
Oh, hi, Kat.
Hi. Oh, Christine, how are you, love? WA.
Yeah, sitting not far from Dorinda at the moment. I just wanted to say you ladies were fantastic, and well done for putting your hand up. Politics is not an easy business to get into, but the fact that you all raised your hand to have a go, Dorinda's already in there doing a great job. But just want to say I really enjoyed hearing your stories tonight, what motivated you to get in, how incredibly proud your families are and your community. And, you know, we always know strong Black women, it's our community. Best, you know, you're the backbone of our community and you're standing up. And I wish you all the very best in your electorates. And we need to have more Aboriginal people in Parliament. So well done.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate that.
Hi, Kat. I'm Wendy.
Hi, Wendy.
And I'm on Tabatha's team in Bonham. And I can't tell you all how grateful I felt when she was finally nominated to run, because we had no one. And I know that I was saying for months before, when are we going to get a candidate? We need someone. You've got to find someone soon. And Tabatha's had to pick up running with almost no time to prepare for it or to be known. But I'm really proud to be part of her team. And I do phone campaigning, and I start off by telling her story about what her work experience was, and that she is just being a fabulous candidate and such an honour to be able to work with her.
Thanks, Wendy.
Yeah, that's
anyway, and I'd also like to say to all these other wonderful, strong women that I'm like Tabatha, not very tall, but I've had a very broad experience in careers too. And the biggest part of mine was when I worked in corrective services, Queensland, and started off as an education officer at Sir David Longlands, a tough prison, and then was transferred over to Moreton Correctional Centre and became manager programs. And during that time, I understand totally what you've been saying, and this comes to you, Jackie, that you put up programs that you wanted to see go through and that you'd prepared, and I know the detail of work that goes into it, and then it just doesn't happen. And I'm 80 now, and I look back over these things, and I don't feel shame or anything that a lot of these programs didn't happen.
Yeah.
But I do feel great disappointment. And when I know that things aren't still at the level that they should be,
Yes.
I want all of you women to go in and shout at them and say, you've got to do something about this, right?
Yeah, there you have it. You have permission from Wendy to get up there and shout about it.
Absolutely.
Get elected and start shouting. Anyone else with any questions?
Oh, hi, it's Jenny Lee Carr. I don't know if you can hear me.
Hi, Jenny.
Yes.
How are you?
Got a camera.
I'm actually running for a Senate seat in Queensland as well with the Indigenous Aboriginal Party of Australia. I'm not sure if people have heard of the party. It's only a fairly new party.
Yeah.
Jackie has. So, yeah, it was actually really wonderful listening to all those other candidates speak, because I can actually relate to a lot of them on why they're wanting to run for Parliament. I had very similar, I've got a background in health.
Yeah.
I'm a mental health nurse. So I do see all that trauma, the way that things aren't done, the way that the community are not treated properly. I've also worked in the NGOs.
We have a question.
And the same thing is to, closing of the gap with health industries, even with the Aboriginal medical services and how they're just not working.
Yeah, I think we need more empathy in policy design, more empathy in execution of policies, and more compassion in legislation, right? So
That's right. That's right.
We have women who have a lived experience of living in marginalised communities. Hopefully, the more we can shape those policies and legislation to really consider, humanitarianism, benevolence, compassion, all of these things that should be innate. But thank you for sharing that, Jackie. Look, it's 8 o'clock now. Unless there's any burning questions. Glenn Crump, are you there?
Yeah, just a quick one, Kat. Thanks again for... Hey, Trish. Yes, I've been out in the pouring rain, mailbox dropping for you tonight.
Thank you, my dear.
Yeah. My question is for Dorinda. All these amazing First Nations candidates, but what is it like once you get into the corridors of power? Is there bipartisan support from the other First Nations people in the Parliament, from all sides of Parliament, or what's it like for you?
Great question, Glenn. And can I say that Lydia Thorpe and I helped to pull back together the Black Caucus. And so the bipartisan, tripartisan support, including the independents, pulling us together and, all getting in one office and having a yarn as mob, not having a yarn as fellas who come from different factions and sides of politics,
Yeah.
Like we've got to lay down the swords at some point and say, how are we all working together in the inside of this machinery for our people? Because that's what we're here for. If we're here to prop up white fellas on the outside, then that's not who we are. Yeah. And so we've had that really frank yarn. So I have to say that we are all on board with it. I get amazing support from our Labor senators. Pat Dodson and I have a good yarn. Malandieri, Linda, I can pick the phone up to, even Ken. So, I think that there is genuine support for our mob inside for each other. What I think has been one of the biggest barriers of being a candidate has been lateral violence, unfortunately, that's come from outside of that in our community. And unfortunately, that's come from other women. I've got enough work in my office and across the Parliament for every woman on this call to come and do, and fella, because we need as many of us as there can be. And I will open the front doors of Parliament for you all to come and help, because we shouldn't be knocking each other down and running each other down. that we should be helping one another, and I want to see that we do that healing amongst each other.
That is a really lovely way to end this session. Thank you so much for sharing that, Senator Cox. If you can make that happen, we will follow you. I promise you.
Absolutely. I'll lead the way.
Yep, we lead the way and we will get on board. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. Final week before election, so everybody get out there, either campaign, help volunteer, get out there and vote, and support your local people of colour candidates. Appreciate your time and good night. Thank you also.
Thank you.
Politics, Warren. Thank you for tonight as well.
Come visit if
Night,
you're in
everyone.
Canberra.
Yeah, you will.
Deadly.
Night, everyone.
Good luck, everybody.
Thanks. Bye. Good luck, everyone. Yep.